He collapsed the moment his wife told him the children belonged to her boss, but no one in that quiet Boston suburb could imagine the storm that would follow. Ethan Wallace, a devoted husband and hardworking construction project manager, had spent years believing he was raising his own family, until the woman he trusted most shattered that illusion with one brutal confession. The shock nearly stopped his heart, but when the truth began to unravel, it wasn't just about betrayal, it was about power, lies, and a secret that went far deeper than infidelity. How could a man recover after discovering his entire family was built on another man's deceit? And what could he possibly do that would leave everyone, including his wife and her boss, utterly shocked? The house on Maple Grove Drive looked peaceful that morning, sunlight filtering through the kitchen blinds, the faint aroma of maple pancakes drifting through the air. Ethan Wallace, a sturdy man in his late 30s, with calm eyes and work-roughened hands, was flipping the last batch when Laura walked in. She wore a loose gray sweater and carried that distant, distracted look she'd had for weeks. "Morning," he said, forcing cheerfulness. "You're up early for a Sunday." She nodded but didn't smile. Her fingers trembled slightly as she poured herself coffee. The silence between them stretched unnaturally long. Ethan tried again. "The kids are still asleep. I was thinking we could take them to the lake today. Get some air." Laura didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the swirling steam above her mug. "Ethan," she said finally, her voice soft, brittle, "we need to talk." The way she said it, flat, emptied of warmth, sent a chill crawling up his spine. "Talk about what?" She took a deep breath, set the cup down, and looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were red, tired. "About the truth." Ethan frowned. "What truth?" Her lips trembled. "Ethan, the kids aren't yours." For a second, the room lost its sound. Only the faint ticking of the wall clock carried through the air. Ethan blinked, unsure he'd heard her correctly. "What?" "They're not yours," she repeated, voice breaking. "They belong to Mark." His body stiffened. The name hit harder than a slap. "Mark?" he whispered. "Mark Anderson?" She nodded, tears pooling. "It started years ago. I didn't mean for it to happen, but one mistake turned into—" "Stop," he snapped. His chest heaved. "You're saying the man I work for, my boss, is the father of our children?" "I'm sorry, Ethan. I tried to tell you before, but—" He didn't hear the rest. A sharp ringing filled his ears and the world tilted. He staggered backward, gripping the counter. The mug slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor. A rush of dizziness overtook him. His chest tightened, vision tunneling into darkness. "Ethan!" Laura cried, rushing forward, but he didn't hear her. The floor rose up fast and then nothing. He woke up hours later to the sterile white ceiling of a hospital room. The faint hum of medical equipment filled the air. His brother Nate sat beside the bed, face pale with worry. "Hey, easy," Nate said, rising. "You passed out at home. Laura called the ambulance." Ethan's eyes darted around, dazed. "The kids? They're fine," Nate said quietly. "Doc said it was a panic collapse. Your body just shut down." Ethan stared at the IV in his arm. His mind was a battlefield, memories clashing with disbelief. The first steps, the school plays, the bedtime stories. All of it now haunted by one unbearable thought. None of it was mine. That night, when the doctor discharged him, he walked out of the hospital without saying a word to Laura. She tried to speak. He kept walking. He got into his truck and drove aimlessly through the sleeping city until dawn. When the sun rose over the Charles River, he parked by the water and sat still, eyes fixed on the horizon. The world felt empty, unreal. But somewhere beneath the wreckage of betrayal, something cold and deliberate began to form. A plan. The night after leaving the hospital felt endless. Ethan drove until the gaslight flickered, his eyes raw from tears he didn't remember shedding. Every streetlight blurred into the next, every sound hollow. When he finally parked by the river, the city was asleep, the water still. He sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles pale. The words kept replaying. "They're not yours, they belong to Mark." He thought of the nights he'd stayed awake helping with fevers, the school projects he'd built from scratch, the birthdays he'd saved months for. 11 years of fatherhood turned into a cruel illusion in a single morning. The ache in his chest deepened until it became a physical weight pressing against his ribs. By dawn, the truck's windows were fogged. His phone buzzed nonstop. Laura's calls, texts, missed calls from his brother. But he ignored everyone. When the sun finally rose, he stepped out, letting the cold air sting his face. He leaned against the hood, eyes on the water, and whispered to himself, "Why, Laura? Why him?" His voice cracked at the sound of her name. The next few days blurred. He went home but didn't speak to her. He slept in the guest room, if he slept at all. Laura tried to approach him once, carrying coffee like a peace offering, but his silence made her freeze in the doorway. "Ethan, I didn't mean for it to happen," she murmured. He turned away, staring out the window. "You didn't mean it, but you did it. For 11 years. She left the room quietly, the sound of her footsteps fading like an echo. At work, everything looked the same, but felt poisoned. Mark Anderson, the man he trusted, admired, laughed with colleagues in the hallway, shaking hands while pretending to be the model of success. Ethan forced a smile whenever their eyes met, pretending nothing was wrong, even as his stomach twisted. He knew he couldn't explode. Not yet. Not without proof. That night after the kids were asleep, Ethan sat alone in his office with a notepad in front of him. He scribbled names, dates, numbers, every business trip, every unexplained late night, every odd expense Laura had tried to hide. It wasn't emotion driving him now. It was precision. Pain had turned into calculation. He thought about confronting Mark, but what good was rage without evidence? Mark would deny everything. Laura would hide behind apologies, and the children, those innocent faces, would be caught in the crossfire. He rubbed his temples and whispered, "No, not like this." The next morning, he made a call he hadn't expected to ever make. "Logan Pierce," came the voice on the other end. The private investigator had been a friend years ago when Ethan caught an employee stealing equipment from a worksite. "Ethan Wallace here," he said quietly. "I need your help again." They met that afternoon at a diner on the edge of town. Logan was older now, a gray at his temples, sharp eyes hidden behind tired lines. "You sound worse than you look," he said, stirring his coffee. Ethan slid an envelope across the table. Photos of his family, Mark, Laura. "I need to know the truth. DNA. Every detail." Logan's eyes scanned the photos. "You sure you want that?" Ethan nodded once. "I can't heal without knowing." Within days, Logan had arranged quiet DNA tests using samples from their family home. Hair from a brush, saliva from toothbrushes. The results came in a plain envelope with no logo. Ethan sat in his truck staring at it for an hour before opening it. His hands shook as his eyes found the words that confirmed everything Laura had said. Both children, biologically Mark Anderson's. The paper fluttered from his hands to the floorboard. He sat motionless, the world around him muted. Then slowly, his expression hardened. That night, Laura came home to find Ethan sitting at the dining table, papers neatly stacked, laptop open. "We need to talk," he said calmly. His voice was so controlled it frightened her. She tried to speak, but he held up a hand. "Not tonight. Tomorrow you'll see." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't break anything. He simply stood, walked past her, and said, "You ended this marriage the day you lied. I'm ending your comfort the same way." In that moment, Laura realized something she hadn't before. Ethan wasn't just hurt, he was planning, and whatever he was planning would change everything. The next morning, Ethan woke before dawn. The air was still, the sky faintly bruised with the first traces of light. He sat on the edge of his bed, hands clasped, staring into nothing. Down the hall, the faint sound of cartoons echoed, his children's laughter. That laughter used to be his peace. Now it tore him in half. He stood, walked quietly to the doorway, and watched them play. They were calling him Dad with pure, innocent joy. And yet every time they said it, he felt it cut deeper. He wanted to hate them, but he couldn't. They were victims too. He left for work without breakfast, driving with a focus that bordered on obsession. At every red light, memories clashed in his head. Laura's voice confessing, Mark's handshake after promotions, the holidays they'd spent together as friends. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his jaw locked. The betrayal wasn't just marital, it was professional, personal, spiritual. The man who'd given him a job had been sleeping with his wife and fathering his children. He arrived at one of the construction sites his team managed, a new downtown office tower funded by Anderson Construction. He put on his helmet and vest, blending with the crew. To them, he was just the humble project manager, a reliable man who never raised his voice. They had no idea that behind that calm stare was a storm. As he checked the blueprints, he caught sight of Mark's luxury car pulling into the site. Mark stepped out in his tailored suit, flashing that rehearsed corporate grin. "Morning, Ethan. Everything on track?" Ethan forced a nod. "As always." "Good. You're the backbone of this company," Mark said, patting him on the shoulder before walking off to greet investors. Ethan watched him go, jaw tight, the weight of the lie pressing on his chest. He realized then that Mark saw him not as a partner, but as a pawn. That smile had always been victory disguised as friendship. By lunch, Ethan met Logan again, this time in a small parking lot behind an auto shop. Logan handed him a brown folder. "I dug deeper, just like you asked." Ethan opened it. Bank statements, private messages, hotel invoices, timestamps. There it was, years of proof. "They started the affair 8 years ago," Logan said quietly, "continued through every out-of-town project. He even paid for her weekend retreats. The timing lines up with both kids' births." Ethan's throat tightened. He closed the folder, eyes burning, but not from tears. "I need more," he said. "More?" Logan asked. "I want to know everything. Every secret, every asset. His company, his personal accounts, his investments. I want to know where his empire is weakest." Logan studied him carefully. "You're not just planning to confront him." Ethan's voice dropped, cold. "No, I'm planning to bury him." For weeks, he played his role to perfection, showing up to work, nodding in meetings, smiling when Mark joked. He made no move, no hint of anger. He acted broken, exactly what they expected him to be. Meanwhile, he began calling silent meetings with attorneys and financial analysts he trusted. Claire Donovan, a corporate lawyer and old college friend, was one of them. "Claire, I need to restructure everything," he said during their first meeting at a quiet bar downtown. "All my companies, shares, real estate, everything under new trusts. Irrevocable, sealed, untraceable." She frowned. "Ethan, that's massive. Why?" "Because I don't want a single dollar of what I've built to end up in her hands, or his." She hesitated. "You're planning something, aren't you?" He looked at her, calm and unflinching. "I'm planning to make sure they learn what losing everything really feels like." Over the next few months, Ethan executed his plan quietly. He resigned from Anderson Construction under the guise of mental health leave, giving a polite handshake to the man who had destroyed his family. Mark smiled, oblivious. "Take all the time you need, Ethan. You've earned it." "Thanks," Ethan replied softly. "You'll hear from me soon." That night, he stood on the balcony of his apartment overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered, steel, glass, and greed. He'd built half of those towers for Mark, thinking he was helping grow a company. Now he realized he'd been building a kingdom for a man who'd stolen his life. But that kingdom had weaknesses, contracts, ethics violations, hidden debts, and Ethan knew them all. He poured himself a drink and whispered to the night, "You took my family, Mark. I'll take your foundation." Somewhere deep inside, the old Ethan, the loving husband, the calm father, was gone. What replaced him was colder, sharper, unbreakable. And the man who had once built skyscrapers was now quietly designing something else entirely. A downfall so devastating it would make both his wife and her boss wish he'd stayed broken. He poured the drink down the sink and slept with the curtains open, as if the city itself needed to witness the bargain he'd just struck with himself. The next morning, he moved with a precision that felt clinical. He told no one, about the conversations he was having, the accounts he was opening, the names he whispered into lawyerly ears. Claire Donovan handled the legal scaffolding, trusts, nominee directors, shell entities domiciled where privacy met the law. Everything went under a small network of fiduciaries and a Delaware holding company, the kind of structure corporations use to hide complexity and protect true owners. Ethan watched each document get notarized and sealed, his signature steady, not a tremor. He didn't burn bridges, he redirected them. He called 3 longtime clients, builders, real estate groups, and a hospital trust, men who had worked with him for a decade and trusted him more than any salesman. He offered them something they couldn't refuse, the same project oversight and integrity they'd always gotten from him without the inflated fees and PR flash that came with Mark's firm. He didn't sell drama. He sold competence, accountability, and the quiet promise that the checkbooks would be honest. The meetings were casual lunches, late-night calls, a show of old photographs, and meticulous blueprints. By the end of a month, small contracts slipped away from Anderson Construction and quietly into the hands of Wallace Structural Group. Always one careful handshake ahead of Mark's lawyers. Logan worked the angles on the outside, credit lines, offshore filings, shell companies that looked innocuous on paper. Claire rewired his personal assets into irrevocable trusts, ensuring Laura could not lay claim to any sudden fortune by filing a spiteful motion. Ethan walked the razor's edge of legality. Every maneuver was vetted, audited, and, where necessary, hidden behind layers of legitimate corporate governance. Ethan's accounting team, veterans who owed him favors from years of mutual loyalty, moved funds in plain sight and through channels that required auditors rather than gossip. It was careful, slow, and surgical. He also cultivated an image of a broken man to the world. He posted photos of quiet mornings, of him in a hoodie, smiling tiredly at the kids on weekends. To neighbors and colleagues, he was healing, a man who needed space and time. To Mark and Laura, he was a wounded, harmless figure, exactly the impression he needed them to keep. Mark grew complacent. He flaunted awards. He courted new investors. He expanded teams with the ease of money that felt eternal. Pride, as Ethan had learned, blinds more effectively than fury. Inside the new company, Ethan let others take the stage while he tightened the screws. He hired old colleagues who were quietly disillusioned with Mark's theatrics, project managers who valued deadlines over press releases, engineers who wanted fairness over favoritism. He built a small, ruthless core team that ran like a well-oiled machine. Where Mark wasted on image consultants and lavish client dinners, Ethan reinvested in quality, safety inspections, honest subcontractor pay, contingency planning. His reputation, earned over years, began to follow the work. When skyscraper bids opened, Wallace Structural's proposals were cleaner, cheaper, and more reliable. Then came the quiet storm. A whistleblower from inside Anderson Construction contacted Logan with documents showing questionable bidding tactics and a series of undocumented consulting fees routed through shell vendors tied to Mark's personal accounts. The files were small at first: receipts, email trails, and a single damning spreadsheet that linked a pattern of conflict of interest to several public contracts. Logan forwarded everything to Claire, who knew how to weaponize corporate law. She filed confidential complaints with oversight boards and regulatory agencies, steps that would take months but would not be reversible. Ethan watched the first tremors from a distance. He kept his face deliberately neutral when a local reporter called about a sudden cancellation of a major Anderson project. He accepted calls from clients with the low-key composure of a man whose hands still shook only in private. Each quiet victory, an awarded bid, a new contract, an auditor's inquiry into Mark's books, was a carefully placed stone in the foundation of a downfall. He had not wanted this life of clandestine maneuvers, but betrayal had made him efficient in ways Payne never had. Every wire, every trust, every shifted contract was a statement. He would not be the man who collapsed and was forgotten. He would be the man who rebuilt himself by rebuilding the industry around him, stripping away the veneer of power from a man who had used his position to steal a life and handing that power back to people who valued truth. Late at night, after the meetings and filings, he would sit at his kitchen table, looking at the children through the window as they played in the yard, and feel the plan's gravity settle into something almost like calm. His revenge was not spectacle. It was a slow, inexorable reclamation. the kind that left no room for denial and no path for those who had lied to recover what they had lost. The night of the charity gala felt like walking into a hall built of glass, beautiful, shining, and waiting to shatter. Ethan arrived precisely on time, his black tuxedo tailored to a degree that made him look effortless. The press lights carved angles into his face but left his eyes unreadable. The Seaport ballroom smelled of roses and expensive cologne. Photographers clustered near the red carpet, catching smiles for tomorrow's pages. Guests moved in rehearsed circles, exchanging lines about philanthropy while bidding wards silently over donations. Mark and Laura floated through them like royalty. Laura's emerald gown bright against the muted crowd. Mark's laugh loud and easy. They believed themselves untouchable. Ethan watched them a while before stepping forward, letting the current of the room carry him toward the podium. When the MC announced the evening's biggest donor, applause rose like a tide, then broke as Ethan's face appeared in the doorway and the lights dimmed. Cameras swung, conversations stitched into a single, stunned hush. He walked with the calm of a man who knew every consequence before it landed. "Good evening," he said, voice steady and practiced. "I'd like to start by saying I admire what this foundation does." His words were hospitality with a blade underneath. People smiled politely, waiting for the usual modesty. "Tonight," he continued, "I'm honored to present a donation from Wallace Structural Group, $10 million to support rebuilding after last year's storms." Polite clapping. Reporters shifted, sensing that something was different. He paused and his gaze found Mark and Laura. The air tightened. "There are men in this room," Ethan said, "who build towers. There are other men who build illusions." He let the sentence hang. The MC, flustered, tried to steer him back to the script. Ethan ignored him. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the foundations of a life look solid until someone pulls the columns out from under them." Cameras zoomed in on Mark's face. His smile twitched. Ethan reached into his inside pocket and produced a sealed envelope. He handed it to a reporter from a local newspaper who stood near the stage, someone he'd contacted the week prior under the guise of a human interest piece. "This contains documents that may be of interest to the public," he said. The envelope was heavy with evidence. DNA reports, bank transfers, hotel bookings, and messages. It was not just accusation, it was proof. Within hours, the room erupted. Phones flashed, whispers turned to frantic murmurs, and Laura's cheeks drained of color. Mark looked as if someone had hit him, his confident posture failing. The photographer's shudders became percussion. Somewhere, someone shouted that copies of the DNA results had been sent to authorities. Ethan watched it all with a terrible clarity. He didn't shout or gloat. He had no need. The truth, in its cold, clinical form, would do the work for him. By the time the gala dissolved into chaos, Mark's award plaque lay untouched on the table where he'd meant to accept it. Investors who had been elbowing to be beside him at the bar now whispered about conflicts of interest and ethics investigations. A reporter cornered Laura beneath a hanging fern and thrust a voice recorder into her face. "Is it true?" she asked, breathless. Laura's world, which had been measured in cocktail napkins and business cards, folded inward like paper. Outside, the news vans rolled in. By morning, the headlines had a kind of relentless cruelty. Anderson Construction Scandal. CEO tied to affair. DNA proves children not fathers. Major donor linked to shady accounts. Mark's name was in every ticker. Laura's face, once glossy in lifestyle spreads, stared from phone screens and grainy stills. People who had smiled at them for years now looked at them as if they'd been caught cheating at something larger than marriage. Caught cheating at life's contract. Laura left the gala holding onto a friend's arm, her mascara streaked, her laughter gone. She tried to meet Ethan's eyes as they passed, but he looked away, not in triumph, but as if observing damage he could not unmake. Mark's resignation was demanded before noon. Boards convened. Calls that had previously been invitations to golf turned into accusations and legal counsel. Investors pulled back, not all at once, but in a slow, inexorable tide. That night, alone in a hotel room he'd booked under a fake name months before, Mark sat on the bed and watched the news in numb silence. The empire he'd polished for years cracked into 1,000 reflections. The man who'd taken lovers and bought loyalty with favors now faced paperwork and subpoenas. Laura lay curled in the back of a car outside the hospital, collapsed into herself, and for the first time in years, there was nowhere for her to hide from truth. Ethan stepped out into the night air, with the city pressing against him like an audience. The tide of cameras, the flashing headlines, the humiliation, they were necessary, surgical. He had not wanted to break a life. He had only wanted to expose what had been built upon lies. The difference, he told himself as he walked away from the bright lights and the shouting, was that the man who had collapsed the morning of the confession would never be the man who engineered a ruin. He had traded the weight in his chest for the cold certainty that justice, however hewn, would be delivered. The next morning, Boston woke to headlines that turned an entire city's admiration into scandal. Mark Anderson's empire began to crumble before sunrise. His phone rang endlessly, board members, investors, lawyers, all demanding explanations he didn't have. Every news channel replayed the moment Ethan handed the envelope to the reporter. Laura's picture appeared beside his, both caught mid-expression, his in shock, hers in humiliation. Their names trended for all the wrong reasons. Ethan didn't watch the news. He didn't need to. He already knew how it would unfold. The statements, the denials, the half-hearted apologies. Instead, he sat by the window of his new apartment overlooking the harbor, a quiet space untouched by memory. The city glowed gold under the morning sun. He sipped his coffee slowly, steady hands, no emotion visible. For the first time in months, his breathing was even. His phone buzzed. It was Claire Donovan. "It's happening," she said, her voice calm but edged with disbelief. "Regulatory agencies are calling it an ethics disaster. Anderson Construction is under review. You may get subpoenaed as a witness." "Good," Ethan said simply. "Let them dig. I made sure the truth is clean." She hesitated. "And Laura?" He exhaled, watching the horizon. She chose her side. Later that afternoon, he drove past their old neighborhood. The once trimmed hedges around their house looked neglected, the blinds drawn. Outside, a small group of reporters gathered, shouting questions as Laura tried to pull into the driveway. Her hair was messy, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. A camera flash caught her mid-tear. Ethan didn't stop. He only slowed down long enough to see the life she'd fought so hard to maintain collapsing like wet cardboard. Inside the house, Laura slammed the door and leaned against it, chest heaving. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends, family, journalists. Her parents had stopped taking her calls after reading the headlines. Mark had locked himself away in his penthouse, refusing to see anyone. When she finally reached him, his voice was sharp, detached. "You're on your own, Laura. I can't protect you anymore." "Mark, please. They're tearing me apart out here." "You should have kept quiet," he snapped, then hung up. For the first time, she realized what Ethan had understood all along. Mark's loyalty was transactional. Once she lost her value, she was disposable. She sank to the floor, clutching her phone, sobbing until her voice broke. Meanwhile, Ethan's company, Wallace Structural Group, became the quiet hero of the industry. His employees worked harder than ever, proud of the integrity their leader embodied. Clients who'd once brushed him aside now lined up to meet. Every article that tore down Mark's reputation seemed to elevate Ethan's. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. He just worked. Calm, deliberate, precise. Revenge wasn't about satisfaction anymore. It was about restoration. By evening, he drove out of the city toward the coast. The sea stretched open, quiet, infinite. He parked near the cliffside and stepped out, the wind brushing his hair. The salt air carried away the last traces of smoke that had followed him since that morning in the kitchen. He closed his eyes and felt the weight lift, but only slightly. There were still ghosts in his silence, memories of laughter that didn't belong to him, faces that called him Dad without knowing the truth. His phone buzzed again, this time a message from an unknown number. "Laura, you've destroyed everything. Are you happy now?" He stared at the message for a long time. His thumb hovered, then he typed slowly. "Ethan." "No, Laura, I didn't destroy it." "You did. I just stopped pretending it was whole." He put the phone away, got back into the car and started the engine. The headlights cut through the mist as he drove home. He didn't know if what he felt was peace or exhaustion, maybe both. But as he turned onto the highway, his expression shifted, something deeper, colder, forming beneath the surface. Because the story wasn't done. There was still one piece missing, one truth he didn't yet know. And when he found it, it would change everything he thought he understood about betrayal, loss, and blood. The knock came late that night, soft but insistent, echoing through the hallway of Ethan's apartment overlooking the harbor. He didn't expect anyone, not after the week that had burned his name into headlines and turned Laura and Mark into walking scandals. He hesitated before opening the door, half expecting a reporter. But it wasn't. Laura stood there. No makeup, hair disheveled, her eyes swollen from days without sleep. She looked smaller somehow, fragile beneath a coat that hung off her shoulders. Rain soaked her sleeves, and when she spoke, her voice trembled. "You think you've won, don't you?" Ethan didn't answer. He simply stepped aside. "You shouldn't be here." She walked in anyway, dripping onto his polished floor. The smell of rain clung to her. She turned toward him, tears glistening under the dim light. "You've ruined my life," she said, voice cracking. "You humiliated me, destroyed everything, but you don't even know the half of it." He crossed his arms, his face cold, unreadable. "Then enlighten me." Laura took a deep, shaky breath. "You think exposing Mark and the affair makes you righteous? You think this ends with headlines and pity?" "Ethan," she paused, her eyes glassy with something darker than regret. "Those children you raised, they're not yours." Not a single one. The words landed like a knife twisting deeper into an already scarred wound. Ethan didn't flinch, but the air seemed to collapse around him. "Say that again," he said quietly. "They're Mark's, all three." She looked away. "You were just their provider, not their father. I'm taking them to live with him. They deserve to be with their biological father." His jaw clenched. "After everything, that's what you came to tell me?" Laura's laugh was dry, hollow. "No, that's not all. Remember the fourth pregnancy? The one I told you ended in a stillbirth while you were in Nevada." She stopped, her voice faltering. "That was a lie." Ethan's heart stilled. "What do you mean a lie?" "I didn't lose the baby," she whispered. "I sold him." The room went silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Ethan's stare didn't move. His lips parted, but no sound came. Laura continued, tears now streaming freely. "I needed the money. We were drowning in debt, and Mark promised to help you with your construction business if I gave him the funds. I sold the baby to a private couple through an adoption broker. That money became the capital he used to finance your expansion that year." Ethan stepped back slowly, one hand gripping the edge of the counter as if the ground beneath him had shifted. His voice dropped, quiet, dangerous. "You sold my child." Laura buried her face in her hands. "I was scared. I didn't know what else to do. You were always gone, working. I thought it was just business. I thought it would fix everything." His breathing grew shallow, each inhale sharp as glass. He could see her mouth moving but heard only fragments. Excuses, guilt, tears. The rest faded under the sound of his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Finally he spoke, his tone almost calm. "Get out!" She looked up, startled. "Ethan!" "Get out of my house, Laura." She hesitated, perhaps expecting rage, maybe a plea. But there was nothing in his expression. No anger, no pity, only a terrifying stillness. She left without another word. The moment the door closed, Ethan's body gave in. He sank into the nearest chair, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. The images flooded in. The son he never met, the wife who bartered blood for money, the man who had orchestrated it all while shaking his hand every morning. The betrayal had gone beyond infidelity. It had rewritten his very existence. He sat there until dawn, unmoving. And as sunlight crept across the floor, something inside him hardened. Not the fury of a broken man, but the resolve of one who understood that mercy had no place left to live. That afternoon, he drove to Anderson Construction headquarters. He didn't plan to speak. He only needed to see. When he reached the executive floor, Mark's voice carried through the half-open door, laughing, the same smooth tone that once commanded entire rooms. But then another voice joined his, lower, familiar. Laura's. Ethan froze outside the door. "I told you," she was saying softly. "He doesn't know about the baby. He thinks it was a stillbirth. I sold it and gave you the money. You got your business through him without him even realizing it." Mark's chuckle followed, casual, cruel. "And the fool still thinks he's a self-made man. If he ever finds out, we're both done." Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. His hand trembled on the doorframe, but he didn't enter. He turned and walked away, face expressionless, steps measured. The world outside was cold and bright, but something inside him had gone darker than ever before. That night, he made one phone call, to Logan Pierce. "Find the child," he said, "no matter what it takes." And for the first time since the morning he collapsed in his kitchen, Ethan's voice carried not pain, not sorrow, only purpose. Logan Pierce didn't ask questions. He never did. He was an ex-police investigator turned private operator, a man who understood silence as currency. When Ethan made that call, his tone alone told Logan it wasn't about infidelity anymore. It was something deeper, darker. "Find the child," Ethan had said, and that was enough. The next morning, Logan met Ethan in the back booth of a downtown cafe. No pleasantries, no wasted words. He slid a manila envelope across the table. "I started digging," he said. "You were right. There's a paper trail, thin, buried under fake adoption records, but it's there." Ethan leaned forward, jaw tight. "How long will it take?" "Depends on how deep you want to go," Logan replied. "The broker who handled the sale disappeared 5 years ago, but the couple who adopted the boy, they're real, wealthy, and discreet. Connecticut address, sealed records, lawyers involved. You'll need leverage or money to open those files." "Money's not the problem," Ethan said quietly. "I'll send you whatever you need." Logan studied him for a moment. "You understand, once I find him, there's no going back. You'll be stirring up something that's legally airtight. They won't want to let go." Ethan's stare didn't waver. "I don't want permission. I want my son." That night, Ethan returned to his penthouse overlooking the harbor, but sleep never came. The confession kept replaying. Laura's trembling voice, Mark's laughter through that office door. He remembered every year he'd worked himself to exhaustion, building the very empire funded by the sale of his child. The irony was venomous. Every glass tower he'd raised was a monument to betrayal. He sat at his desk, opening his laptop. On the screen glowed the empire he'd built in secret. Wallace Structural Group, shell companies and trusts that now controlled nearly half the city's new construction contracts. He had become untouchable, but it meant nothing. Not when his flesh and blood was out there somewhere, growing up believing another man was his father. Weeks turned into months. Logan's updates came in fragments. Old medical files, names of clinics, social workers, records sealed by court orders. Finally, one late evening, Logan called. "I found him." Ethan's breath hitched. "Where?" "Greenwich, Connecticut. Couple named Richard and Elise Porter. No criminal background. Big house. They adopted a boy 7 years ago through a private intermediary. Everything about the file screams money and influence. But Ethan," Logan hesitated. "There's something you need to know. The boy can't walk." Ethan's chest tightened. "What do you mean can't walk?" "Congenital trauma, probably from complications after birth. The doctors called it temporary paralysis, but there's no detailed record. The Porters kept everything private. They have therapists, specialists, but he's been in a wheelchair most of his life." For the first time in months, Ethan's composure cracked. He lowered the phone slowly, staring at the empty space in front of him. His son, his only biological child, had spent years in pain, hidden away in a mansion bought with the money that came from his own stolen blood. The next day, he drove to Connecticut. The Porter's estate was massive, surrounded by trimmed hedges and security gates. He parked a distance away, watching. Through the window of the family room, he saw him, a small boy with dark hair and wide eyes, sitting in a wheelchair, turning pages of a book while a nurse adjusted his blanket. For a moment, Ethan forgot how to breathe. The boy's face had his own quiet gaze, the same dimple in the left cheek he'd seen in childhood photos of himself. He couldn't approach. Not yet. Logan was working on the legal angle, contacting the right people under the radar, tracing where the adoption process had bent the law. Ethan stayed in the car for nearly an hour, memorizing the child's face. When he finally started the engine, there was no sound in his chest, no pounding rage, just a strange, calm ache. Over the following weeks, he built the next phase of his plan. Revenge against Mark and Laura wasn't enough anymore. It had become something smaller compared to what mattered now. Recovering his son was his new war, and he'd fight it quietly, relentlessly, with the same precision that had dismantled Mark's empire. By the time the legal documents were ready and the private negotiations handled, Ethan was ready for the confrontation that would reshape everything again. But what he didn't know was that reclaiming his son would also reopen a part of his heart he'd long buried, one that would lead him to a woman who would heal what betrayal had broken. It began the day he brought his son home and met the maid who would change both their lives forever. When Ethan finally brought his son home, the house felt different, quieter, lighter, almost sacred. It wasn't the sterile silence of betrayal anymore. It was the fragile stillness of something new trying to take root. The boy's name was Noah, 7 years old, sharp eyes, cautious smile, the face of a child who had learned to read adults before trusting them. He barely spoke at first. Every sound startled him. Every gesture from Ethan made him flinch a little, not from fear, but from confusion. He didn't know this man who called him son. The adoption reversal had been swift and quiet. Money moved faster than conscience in those circles, and the Porters didn't fight. Ethan gave them what they asked for, enough to make them vanish from the conversation forever. He didn't blame them. They hadn't known the truth. Laura had made sure of that. But when the paperwork cleared and Noah came home, Ethan stood by the door, unsure how to even begin. Noah's wheelchair squeaked slightly as he rolled into the living room. He looked around, eyes darting from the polished floors to the towering windows. "This is big," he said softly. It was the first thing he'd said since they left Connecticut. Ethan knelt beside him, forcing a smile. "It's home now." Noah nodded, uncertain. "Will I stay here?" Ethan's throat tightened. "Forever, if you'll let me." But caring for a child with mobility issues was something Ethan wasn't prepared for, not emotionally, not physically. He'd spent years managing construction crews and building skyscrapers, but now he found himself struggling with simple things. Lifting Noah, helping him bathe, getting him to sleep. Every attempt felt clumsy, inadequate. One evening, after almost dropping him while trying to move him from the wheelchair to the bed, Ethan realized he couldn't do this alone. The next morning, he called an agency. "I need a live-in caregiver," he said. "Someone experienced, patient, someone who understands children." 3 days later, she arrived. Her name was Mia Carter, late 20s, simple white blouse, jeans, soft voice. She carried herself with quiet dignity, humble but composed. The agency spoke highly of her. "You'll like her," they said. "She's not just good with kids. She has a way of fixing what's broken without making it obvious." Ethan met her at the door, skeptical. "I'm not looking for sympathy," he said. She smiled gently. "Good, I don't offer that." From the moment she met Noah, something in the house shifted. She didn't treat him like a fragile object or a patient. She spoke to him like a person. She knelt to his level, smiled, and said, "Hi, I'm Mia. Do you like pancakes?" He nodded shyly. "Then we'll get along." Within days, Noah started laughing again. Mia had a way of turning therapy into play. She'd help him move his legs by pretending they were racing cars. Every stretch a victory. Ethan often found himself watching from the doorway, this young woman singing softly while Noah giggled through pain. The sound filled the house like light. Weeks passed, and the small victories multiplied. Noah began lifting himself without assistance. Then one morning, Mia called out, voice trembling with excitement, "Ethan, come here!" He rushed to the living room and froze. Noah was standing, wobbling, shaky, but upright. Tears stung Ethan's eyes before he even realized they were there. Noah grinned. "Look, Dad!" For the first time in years, Ethan felt something uncorrupted, pure joy. He knelt beside his son, steadying him as Mia wiped a tear from her cheek. "You did it, Noah," Ethan whispered. "You really did it." That evening, after Noah had fallen asleep, Ethan found Mia in the kitchen washing dishes. "You've done more for him in a month than I have in a lifetime," he said quietly. She shook her head. "You gave him something to live for. I just helped him remember it." He smiled faintly. "You could have taken any job. Why this one?" Her expression softened. "Because once someone took everything from me. Helping people rebuild is how I fight back." Ethan didn't press, but something about her tone, haunted yet resilient, lingered in his mind. Over the next few months, the lines between gratitude and affection began to blur. They shared late dinners after Noah went to bed, small conversations that grew into deeper ones. Mia had a quiet strength, a grace that steadied him in ways he hadn't expected. For the first time since Laura's betrayal, Ethan laughed again. Genuine, unguarded laughter that made the house feel alive. One night, as they stood on the balcony watching the city lights shimmer, Ethan looked at her and said, "You've saved both of us, you know." Mia turned to him, eyes glinting in the city glow. "You don't need saving, Ethan. You just needed someone to remind you what home feels like." What neither of them knew that night was that fate wasn't done weaving its irony, because soon Ethan would learn who Mia truly was, and that the woman who had healed his son's body was tied to the same past that had broken his heart. It happened on a quiet Sunday evening, months after Noah had begun to walk again. The house felt alive now, filled with laughter, music, and the scent of Mia's cooking. Ethan had grown used to the sound of her humming while she worked, a melody that seemed to stitch the home together. For the first time in years, the air inside his walls carried peace instead of pain. That night, Mia was helping Noah assemble a Lego skyscraper by the fireplace when the doorbell rang. Ethan opened it to find Claire Donovan standing there, smiling faintly, holding a folder. "You're impossible to schedule with," she said, "so I came to you." Ethan chuckled, ushering her in. "Guilty. I've been distracted." He glanced toward Mia and Noah, both laughing over a misplaced piece. Claire followed his gaze, a hint of warmth in her eyes. "So that's the famous Mia," she whispered. "You weren't exaggerating. She's exactly what you needed." "Maybe more than I deserve," Ethan said quietly. After Claire left, Ethan found Mia cleaning up the toys. She smiled when she saw him. "Your lawyer's nice," she said. "She's the one who helped with everything?" He nodded. "She saved me more than once." Something flickered in Mia's eyes, an emotion he couldn't read. "Must be nice," she murmured, "having people who believe in you when everything falls apart." He stepped closer. "You have that too now." She smiled, small and fragile. "Maybe." A few days later, while cleaning his study, Mia stumbled upon a photo on Ethan's desk, an old family picture from years ago, taken at a corporate retreat. Laura stood beside him, radiant and smiling, before everything fell apart. Mia froze. Her face went pale. She picked up the frame, her hand trembling slightly, her breath catching in her throat. When Ethan walked in, she quickly set it down, forcing a smile. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's fine," he said softly. "That was another life." She looked at him, searching his eyes. "Laura Wallace," she whispered, almost to herself. "That's your ex-wife?" He hesitated, surprised by the tremor in her tone. "Yes. You've heard of her?" Mia nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew her, a long time ago. We were in the same college." Ethan frowned. "You knew Laura?" She laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. "Knew her? I knew her better than anyone. We were roommates sophomore year. She was brilliant, beautiful, charming, manipulative. She always got what she wanted, no matter who she had to step on." He listened silently, the air thickening. "She wanted a scholarship that wasn't hers," Mia continued, voice tight with old anger. "And when she realized I was ahead of her, she framed me, said I plagiarized my research paper. The university suspended me. My entire future collapsed overnight. She didn't even apologize. She smiled when they escorted me out." Ethan stared at her. words failing him. I dropped out, she said softly. My parents were sick. I took whatever jobs I could find. Restaurants, cleaning, caregiving, anything to survive. Laura went on to marry rich, live her perfect life. And I thought I'd buried all of that until I saw that photo. Silence filled the room. The fire popped softly behind them. Ethan took a step closer, studying her face. The pain, the strength, the irony of it all. You're telling me my ex-wife ruined your life? Years before she ruined mine? Mia nodded, eyes glistening. Looks like she's good at that. He exhaled slowly, leaning against the desk. Fate's got a cruel sense of humor. Mia smiled faintly, but tears slipped down her cheeks. I never thought I'd end up working for you. Ethan, I didn't even know who you were at first, but now, I don't regret it, because it brought me here, to Noah, to you, and I mean this. Whatever she did to me, to you, she doesn't get to define what we become. Ethan reached out, brushing a tear from her face. She already doesn't. You do. For the first time in years, he felt warmth where anger used to live. The universe had connected two broken souls scarred by the same hand, and somehow, through that shared pain, they'd built something whole. That night, as Mia stood by the window looking out at the harbor, Ethan walked up behind her and took her hand. She didn't pull away. I never believed in destiny, he said quietly, but maybe it believes in us. She turned to him, eyes soft. Then let's make it count. And in that small, quiet room where two lives once shattered by the same woman now intertwined, the past finally began to lose its power. Rain fell softly against the windows that morning, tracing silver lines down the glass as the city woke to another gray Boston dawn. Ethan stood by the window of his study, watching the clouds hang low over the skyline. For once, the sound of thunder didn't unsettle him, it soothed him. It had been almost a year since the scandal, a year since he'd learned every painful truth, and life had quietly rearranged itself into something resembling peace. Down the hall, laughter drifted through the house. Noah was walking on his own now, slowly, carefully, but proudly. Mia's voice followed his, calm and warm, as she encouraged him to take one more step before breakfast. Ethan smiled faintly. That sound, the mix of joy and struggle, had become the heartbeat of his home. He walked to the living room doorway and watched them without interrupting. Noah's legs trembled slightly as he made his way toward Mia, arms outstretched. You did it, she cheered, catching him before he stumbled. Ethan felt his chest tighten in quiet awe. The boy who once couldn't stand was now walking, because of her. When Noah saw his father, he grinned. Dad, did you see that? Ethan nodded. I saw it, champ. You're stronger every day. Noah puffed out his chest proudly. That's because Mia said my legs listen when my heart believes. Ethan chuckled, glancing at her. She's got a way with words. Mia smiled, brushing Noah's hair from his forehead, and he's got a way with proving people wrong. The phone rang. Ethan excused himself to the study and picked it up. Claire's voice came through, brisk as ever. You should turn on Channel 7, she said. Your ex-wife's name is back in the news. He hesitated before switching on the TV. The headline crawled across the screen. Former CEO Mark Anderson indicted for financial fraud. Co-conspirator Laura Wallace under investigation. The anchor's voice was steady, clinical. Sources confirm that Laura Wallace allegedly assisted in falsifying charity donations and diverting funds during her marriage to Mark Anderson. Both face potential federal charges. Ethan's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in grim inevitability. Justice had moved at its own pace, but it had arrived. Claire's voice continued over the line. You know you could press civil charges for the child sale, right? The evidence you gave me... No, Ethan interrupted softly. Let the law handle what's left. I've already taken back what mattered. She was silent for a moment. You sound free. He looked toward the living room, where Mia was teaching Noah to tie his shoelaces. For the first time, I am. After hanging up, he stepped outside onto the balcony. The rain had eased, leaving the world washed clean. Below, the city stretched endlessly, the same skyline that once symbolized everything he'd lost. Now it simply stood there, neutral, indifferent, no longer holding power over him. Mia joined him quietly, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. "You saw the news," she said softly. He nodded. "Yeah, the empire finally collapsed." "She'll try to reach out," Mia said. "People like her always do when the world stops clapping." "She already did," Ethan said, his tone even. "A letter came last week. I didn't open it." Mia studied his face for a moment. "Do you ever wonder why she did it? Why people destroy what's good?" He turned to her, eyes calm. "Because some people only know how to measure love through power, and when they lose control, they panic." She nodded slowly. "And you?" "I learned to measure it by peace." He looked down at her, voice soft. "And you're the first peace I've ever known." She smiled then, not shyly, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had finally arrived where she was meant to be. "You know what's funny?" she said. "If she hadn't ruined both our lives, we never would have met." Ethan smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "Maybe some storms are just meant to clear the air." Inside, Noah called out from the hallway. "Dad! Mia, come see! I can run now!" They both turned. The boy was running, clumsy, fast, arms flailing, but running. Mia gasped, tears filling her eyes. Ethan stepped forward, arms wide, and caught his son as he stumbled into him, laughing breathlessly. For a long moment, father and son held each other, and the room filled with the sound of something rare, pure, unguarded joy. Mia stood watching, one hand over her heart. The light from the window touched all three of them, soft and golden, as if the world itself had exhaled. Ethan looked at her over Noah's shoulder. "We're home," he said simply, and this time it wasn't a promise. It was the truth.